what comes to mind for you in the trip or the adventure that you felt like you were closest to dying on? What's the trip that you shouldn't have came home from?
Well, one was from a political situation, and some have been from animals. But I was actually in Zimbabwe when
Fred Eichler is one of the most respected and authentic voices in the hunting world today, a lifelong outdoorsman who has built his reputation on grit, skill, and a deep respect for the wild. Fred is widely recognized as one of the most premier traditional bow hunters in the world, taking over 30 species with traditional archery equipment. He's one of the few hunters to complete the North American Super Slam with a recurve bow, a testament to his discipline and mastery of the craft. Beyond the accolades, what sets Fred apart is his authenticity. He's not about hype. He's about hard work, ethical hunting, and passing along the tradition the right way. So Fred, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, man. I'm honored. I appreciate it.
So 39 years in Colorado, and now you said right before we started recording, you have your guide and your outfitting business. One of the sons is taking it over. You've had quite the life in the outdoors.
I've been very, very fortunate. That was my passion from early on. My dad was a great instructor. My dad was actually a Green Beret when he was younger. So he epitomizes, he's not only a very smart man, he has a master's degree, he's very intelligent. He can quote poetry, but he can also kick your ass, I guess. But he's a great guy, and he's a true conservationist. I mean, he was one of those guys that, felt if you were out hunting, you needed not only know all the different animals out in the woods and the birds and the trees and the bushes, and, you needed to recognize them, respect them. But you also need to utilize the animals that you harvested. So he had a great deal of respect. So I learned a lot of that from him, and I've had some great mentors. People like, Fred Bear, Mike Palmer. There's been a lot of people besides my father that I've also, looked up to and respected, that have been good people to try and emulate, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, mentors are a huge deal, and surrounding ourselves by the right people is a huge deal. But backing up for a second, what did it look like for you when you were young? When did you kind of start hunting? When did your dad start dragging you along? When did you actually start kind of hunting with that recurve bow?
So great question. My dad, as soon as I was big enough to carry, really, there's pictures of me, hunting and fishing when I was too big to even carry anything out, or even anything into the woods. So I guess, it's been pretty much my whole life. My dad was really good about, let me watch him, follow him, and then learning things. And then, like a lot of people, it started with a BB gun, and, then a 22, and then, it was a sense of freedom for a young man. My dad would give me like 322 shells, and I'd better either bring back 322 rounds or 222 rounds and a squirrel, or, and it was just trying to teach me, one, so I wasn't, out there just, launching, irresponsibly, bullets at animals. But it was to make sure I snuck up, used my, woodsman skill to get in range, and only took shots that I was very sure of. So even when I got to do those little forays by myself, I look back and I go, man, he was really teaching me a lot there. It wasn't like, here's a whole bag of 22 rounds, have fun. It was, okay, you're old enough and I trust you and you're responsible enough to go out in the woods with this, but here's 3 bullets.
Make them count.
Yes, sir. And then the archery, actually, I brought my dad into archery. He enjoyed muzzleloader, rifle, shotgun, duck hunting, bird hunting, all that good stuff, small game. But Fred Bear, I started reading Fred Bear's field notes and, watching his TV show, and, I wanted to try a bow, and my dad really, he encouraged it. He was like, if that's what you want to do. Like a lot of people, I think he was a little concerned. He had heard some of the misconceptions about archery. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
He was a true hunter, didn't want anything wounded, wanted to make sure it was a good shot. So he made sure I was, in my early teens, proficient enough before he would let me go out deer hunting, with my bow. And then, started out with a compound. Well, that's actually not true. My first bow was a recurve. So I guess, like a lot of people, I started out with the little fiberglass recurve.
Yeah.
I got a compound. And then at about 20 years old, I kind of went back to the recurve and was die hard pushing the recurve from, man, I'd say 21, 22 on.
Man. Yeah, that's wild. And it sounds like with your dad's military background and being a Green Beret, that even the tradition of hunting was being passed down, but probably a lot of like mental toughness characteristics were being passed down as well at that same time.
I'd agree with that. My dad has no quit in him. Even today, he's almost 80, and he was walking miles quail hunting with us. Not I guess a few weeks ago. He shot doubled on turkeys in Florida. He just he. I hope I'm as tough as he is in another 20 years because he's a great guy to look up to that way.
Man, yeah, just to be out turkey hunting when you're 80, that's kind of what we're all striving for. So, question for you, like you, and we talk a lot about this on this show, but you've lived a pretty phenomenal life. You've lived a pretty adventurous life. So since you were 20 until now, for sure, you've been to a tremendous amount of places. You've traveled all over the globe on different expeditions, adventures, different trips, and you haven't really let fear stop you from doing that. And curious, is that your DNA? Is that your personality type? Or are you kind of courageously pushing through that fear? Because you do talk to a lot of men, and I have conversations with a lot of men right now, and they're scared to actually pull the trigger on some of these things. They're scared to pull the trigger on the Alaska hunt. They're scared to pull the trigger on taking their family to South Africa, even though they have the resources. They're just kind of stuck. And what that does lead to is it leads to a ton of regret. And then, that regret leads to them feeling worse, and them feeling worse leads to some of these other symptoms that we're seeing in America with, epidemic substance abuse, complacency, passivity, Netflix. You've in your lifetime found ways to overcome that, and just curious how you think about that.
That's a great question. And I wouldn't say I'm courageous. Maybe I've just never really thought about it. Or maybe it's the fact that, I was in a lot of crazy situations, and I guess from my dad's, upbringing, it was, you always strive forward, you push forward. That's what you do. If it's something you want to do, you achieve that goal. But, I've been, bitten by an alligator, got mauled pretty good. I've been charged by brown bears. I've been charged by grizzly bears. I've been, involved in plane crashes where I was stranded in the Alaska range. I've had leopards charge me where, PH shot one about 10 feet from me. So I've been in some crazy situations like a lot of people, I think. But I guess I never considered, it was the goal. It was like
Mm-hmm.
it was all, and I hate to say it's part of the adventure because there's been certainly some bad situations where people have been hurt that I was with, or where I've been injured. But it's just that set end goal, it's that pushing through. I talked to a friend of mine that did one of the 100-mile marathon runs, and all his toenails fell off, and his blood in his socks and the whole 9 yards. I'm like, holy chowder, man, that was a push, and he's like, I never really think about that. It's just,
Just go.
yeah, you got, this is my goal, and this is what I did. So, yeah, I think people, it's sad to me because some people talk about wanting to do really cool things, or exciting things, or, one day I'm going to get in shape. One day I'm going to, climb this mountain, one day I'm going to do this. And I guess I look at it and, that day's right now, you know what I mean? I'm very fortunate in the fact that what I love to do helps keep me in shape, carrying a backpack, guiding hunters, hiking miles, you know what I mean, and altitude.
Yeah.
But it's a mental push. I think a lot of people are a lot tougher than they think they are. And that's the biggest thing, is probably that mental challenge. So I guess I would say, it's people's biggest weakness is themselves. It's not anybody else, not anybody putting you down. It's not, it's the biggest weakness is, our own, what we can handle mentally, you know what I mean? And convincing yourself you can do that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether it's that extra rep, whether it's, running that, extra mile, whether it's climbing that mountain when you're tired.
What's up, guys? Dustin here. As you know, good music in the gym for your workouts can change everything. The right music allows you to flip that switch and keep pushing when you need a breakthrough. We've been running the Turtle Box speakers for a while now, and these things are waterproof, tough, loud. These things are built like a tank. The Turtle Box Ranger is great if you're on the move. The original covers most days, and that's what you see around here. And the new Turtle Box Grande puts out some serious volume for big spaces. Check them out at turtleboxaudio.com.
I've been guiding 35 years now. And not to bore you with a big, long explanation, but, over that time, I would say a strong 95, maybe even 98% of those have been men. I've taken quite a few ladies as well over the years, but, vast majority are men.
Yeah.
And it has surprised me how many times I've had people quit, whether it was an elk hunt, a mountain lion hunt, you know what I mean? A really difficult mule deer, bear hunt, and the things that you hear are always the same. I can't, I can't do that. It's like, yes, you can. Yeah. And it's just, it's not, don't look at it and think, man, we got to, climb 5 miles. It's one step at a time, and that's the old adage, right? A journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. And, it's been, I think I've learned better. I've grown as a person to help people, I think, push themselves, if you will, without, how would I say, without putting them down, you know what I mean? Without going, because when I was younger, sometimes it was really, like it's not that far, but nobody likes to feel, and you never want to make anybody feel badly, but sometimes it's just that mental game of, hey, if you need a break, let's take a break. And yeah, I know I'm telling you, we got to get to that mountain, but let's do it one step at a time, and, take 3 steps. And, you don't have to think that you got to get to that mountain. You just have to take that next step.
Yeah.
And then just take that next step, and mentally, I don't know, I could go on about it a lot, but, I've realized that some people have a fear of sleeping out in the woods because they've never done it. You know what I mean? They've never, had guys go, well, if, I was looking at the time and, I figured there was no way we were going to get out by dark. So what if we don't get up until the next morning? If we need to start a fire and sleep by it, I guess, so I've tried to be better about, talking to people about, well, let's narrow that down. Why don't you think you can make it? Or, is it rooted in something else? Like, I don't want to come back after dark because I'm scared of mountain lions, or I'm scared of bears, or I'm, or this is my fear or my paranoia, and trying to help people, work through that.
You probably have been surprised quite a few times, I would imagine, as well, from the perspective of a college athlete that might come down to go on a trip with you, and you're guiding them, and you might see them bonk under pressure or fold under, some mindset pressure, compared to someone that didn't appear to be extremely physically fit, but they had what it took between the ears and kind of caught you off guard. Is that accurate?
That is extremely spot on. Yes. There's, I've been blown away. I've had guys that have come in, that looking at him, I thought, oh man, this guy's going to be something else. and other guys that have come in that, maybe didn't, they didn't look like Atlas, you know what I mean? They might have been heavy set, or they may have been, you know what I mean? Not what you think of as your stereotypical, in shape person, but they can go harder than anybody. So, again, adages or, you know, oh, there's old sayings around for a reason. And one of my favorites is, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
Yeah.
And, that goes to exactly what you said, which is, it is so many things in life, to your reference about substance abuse or anything else. It's so much more mental than people realize. It's that mental toughness. It's the no, I'm gonna get up today. I am gonna hike today, and yeah, I'm sore, but I'm gonna work through it. Or no, I'm not gonna have that drink today because that's messing my life up. Or whatever that crutch is, I'm not gonna do that because I want to have a better life, or I want to have a better experience, or I want to spend more time in the outdoors, or, I want to spend more time taking people out hunting, or more time with my kids, grandkids, any of that. So, the mental aspect, I've talked to people about that before, that, it's right here.
And then the mental aspect for you too is probably interesting in that what has given you such a phenomenal life has been a life in the outdoors. And so for 35 years at least, you've spent a tremendous amount of time outdoors with your trips and the TV shows and the guiding. But part of that mentally for you, was it also you having to turn down a lot of things that maybe the world was pushing you into when you were younger? So like when you were 20 to 25, like friends telling you to go get this corporate job, or family members telling you to go get this corporate job, I'm sure that pressure was thick in your 20s, I would imagine. But now looking at it, it's like, oh, thank God I didn't do that. Is that how you feel?
Very accurate. Yeah. So, I think a lot of people have that pressure, and, I would never say what's right for me is right for someone else. But yeah, I think a lot of people, oh, you have to have health insurance, you have to have retirement, you have to have a job that you can retire from, and you have to have this. But I think, it's funny, starting to guide at a young age really helped me, because I got to talk to a lot of guys that, they had the money to go on a guided hunt and travel. And a lot of the stories they had about, I work a miserable job, or I hate my job. I remember talking to one guy. He was a stockbroker, and he was I guess on the New York Stock Exchange, like on the floor, and he was the man, probably the saddest, unhappy, you know what I mean? Like, very stressed, had multiple heart attacks, you know what I mean? And all this stuff. But he got himself stuck into a rut. You know what I mean? He had bills he had to pay. That was one of the few jobs, you know what I mean? He was good at his job, I guess, is what he told me. And, to pay the bills that he had, and, to have the vehicles that he thought he needed to have, he had to keep that job. But I remember, there's been a lot of times talking to guys where I'm like, ooh, that's sad. You know what I mean? I would much rather, we only have one go round, and I would rather not make very much money and, have something I'm passionate about, do something I'm excited about. I can't wait to get up and go the next day. I don't like rut. I don't like the same thing. I think that makes us lethargic, both mentally and physically. So, that's why, if you're working out, you don't do the exact same thing. If you want your muscles to react, you're going to do something different.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, at least, I like different, you know what I mean? I love that when I'm hunting, it's going to be a different, situation every time. I never know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? What it's going to be like when, it's going to be different every day. And I like that.
It is wild how those the golden handcuff situations can come in and get a lot of guys. And once kind of those golden handcuffs are put on, that ability to make that pivot or make that switch can be really, really difficult on a lot of guys.
Yeah, even with my boys, my suggestions have always been to people, you know, try and find something you can be passionate about. You know what I mean? And some people have to do certain things, and hey, there's parts of every job we don't all love. You know what I mean? Like, I don't like taking out the trash every day. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
I have to do that. And I love riding horses, but I don't like feeding them every day. Sometimes, it's like, man, it's that grind of man, I got to get up. You know what I mean? I've got to do this every day. But what I mean, the joy I get out of the horses, and it makes the work worth it. But yeah, I guess some of the advice I passed on to younger people who have talked to me, or even my kids, is get something you're passionate about. Try and find something that you enjoy, and embrace the suck, so to speak. As I've heard before, there'll be parts of every job you don't, you're not passionate about, or may not be your favorite. But knock it out. Don't be the guy that nobody wants to be around because you're whining about it all the time.
For sure. Mountain Ops supplements keep you going steady. I've personally been on their Yeti pre-workout for clean energy without jitters, and their Hydrate to stay topped off during long days when you need those electrolytes. Creatine and protein are a staple for me for building and bouncing back. Plus, they have no junk, just real fuel. It's simple, reliable stuff that helps you push when it counts. Get 20% off Mountain Ops supplements at mountainops.com using code MOUNTAINTOUGH. That's MTNTOUGH. All right, now back to work. Has your 35 years in guiding mostly all been at that same location down there?
So I've got it in a lot of places. I've got it in Florida, I've got it in Nebraska, got it in Colorado, got it in New Mexico. But yeah, the vast majority, has been in Colorado. I've done some side work for guys in Texas, guiding pigs and things like that too. But yeah, almost, the vast majority has been in Colorado. It's nice, it's close. I know the terrain. I know a lot of the different countries, so it makes it nice. I'm much more familiar with the animals.
Mm-hmm.
If I go out, I'd much rather take somebody out after something that I feel like I've got a little more knowledge base on.
And you got at least one of your sons working for you in that business now?
Actually, two. Yeah. Two of the boys are yep. Seth's kind of taking over managing the outfitting business, kind of helping run it. And then him and Trent both help guide, which is awesome. My dad still guides,
Dang.
which is unbelievable. It's awesome to me. It's always fun having him out there, helping guide, and people really enjoy seeing him out there. And I actually, funny story. He had a guy that had been hunting with us for years, and my dad. Oh, I guess he was probably 72 or 74 at the time, but he had just broken down a guy's elk, and my dad picked up a hind quarter, and to be set aside. The guy said, "Man," he said, "I was almost half your dad's age, and I couldn't pick up a hind quarter that easily." So I decided to work out, and the next year he came back, like the guy looked super fit, and I was like, "Man, you look great." And he goes, "Man, your dad, he kind of humiliated me, to be honest." He said, he was just, he's just a strong man, Now, my dad's fortunate; he's like 6'4", and I don't know, he's probably 220 now.
Dang.
He's always been kind of
Big.
He's always been a strong guy, but
yeah.
But it's funny how people encourage you sometimes. I've had people that where I was like, man, I gotta work out more. That guy's a lot stronger than me, or I feel like I should have been able to keep up with this guy, running or whatever. I think people help push people.
Oh yeah, man. The fact that he's out there doing some guiding at 80 and still moving around, and we all like at Mountain Tough, we talk a ton about switching your mindset to be always ready, and always ready really means, how can I be capable for as long as possible? Because really that's what we're all in many ways looking for, is how can I be capable in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s? And capable means, can I hike with my kids? Can I hunt with my kids? Can I elk hunt with my grandkids? And that focus on longevity versus, crashing and burning from getting an injury in our 50s, from training too hard or lifting too heavy, kind of switching that mindset to the long run. but it sounds like he's really done it, which is incredible.
Yeah, yeah, he's a pretty awesome individual.
So for you, curious, when did it kind of click that you were going to kind of dedicate a big chunk of your life to recurve and traditional archery? Did you go through a season where you like did some rifle hunting, did a little bit of everything, and then just kind of decide to go all in with the recurve?
So, I still do a little bit of all of it. I still
Okay.
enjoy, what I mean, bird hunting with a shotgun. I still love predator hunting with a, what I mean, with a predator rifle, going out and doing that. And I've done some big game hunting with a rifle, but, again, a vast 95% of everything I do is with a recurve, but it's because I guess I enjoy, the getting close, to me, and different strokes for different people. I have no problem with guys going out, and I've done it, with a rifle and reaching out and touching one. But when you're bow hunting, man, I love that getting in, under 20
Mm-hmm.
yards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As close as I could get, and that's what I find the most pleasure in. It's it's tougher. Physically, it's tougher. Mentally, it's tougher. You know what I mean? If I wanted to, you know, shoot an animal every time or have a better chance every time, then I would take a rifle for sure. And, I'd be dialed in and be able to
Yeah.
shoot at distance. But to me, the challenge and the excitement is going out with a very simple bow, that doesn't have sights and, doesn't have a breakover and, doesn't have 32 set screws on it. And it's a string and some wood or metal riser, and I'm going out and it's my own strength that pulls it back. It's my own hand-eye coordination that helps me shoot accurately. So I've shot everything, and I have different things that I enjoy shooting. But yeah, for me, the traditional bow is by far my favorite, and it's because of that challenge of getting
Mm-hmm.
close.
Yeah.
A lot of times that challenge also, I've talked about, to me, a traditional bow, a lot of times, what I mean, under 25 yards is the most efficient weapon to have too, because I don't have all the crutches of the sights, the release, the, what I mean, all the set screws that could work loose and the pins that could vibrate loose and,
Yeah.
all this stuff. So, if I am fortunate enough and, what I mean, can use my, skills to get up close enough to an animal, when I do get super close, a lot of times a traditional bow, in that really close range gives you an advantage.
Yeah, it shows your desire to like choose the hard way, not only from it it being harder to get that close, generally 25 yards or less to a big game animal, but also, with recurve, the dedication it takes just in the practice arena is usually, quite significant compared to rifle hunting or even compound hunting. Just the amount of reps you have to have before you're really proficient with that weapon just kind of shows that you're kind of pursuing that hard way all the time.
Definitely enjoy it. I don't have to practice as much with a rifle. That's, what I mean. I like a lot of guys. Like, a lot of guys are hardcore and who shoot all year and practice. But yeah, with a rifle, it's pretty much, okay, let's pull it down, check it, confirm zero, and you know what I mean. You're pretty much good to go. But yeah, so I enjoy that. That's all part of it, and that's what I enjoy doing. And it's a fun pursuit, like somebody fly fishing, I guess, instead of using a bobber and a worm. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, use bobber and worm forever, and that's great. And they enjoy that. Some people go, you know what? I want to learn to tie my own flies. I want to, I want to learn to, you know, use a fly rod to try and take an animal, or take a fish, and because it's more enjoyable for me personally. So, it's all about, I try not to let anybody else's goals or what's super important to them rub off on me. It's whatever I get the most enjoyment out of in that pursuit. And same thing with trophy. Some people feel like they have to take a trophy animal, which is fine if that's the hunt for you, to hold out for a big giant mature animal. To me, it's more about the experience. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The trophy is in the hunt itself, and a good shot, in the meat, You know what I mean? That to me is
Yeah.
that's the trophy.
For more than a century, America's sportsmen and women have led the way in paying for the restoration of wildlife, conserving habitat, and investing in the future of our natural world. This is a legacy built not on what we take ourselves, but on what we give back. That's the nature of conservation, paying it forward for the next generation. This is the reason Mountain Tough is a proud partner of Wild Sheep Foundation, an organization committed to keeping and putting wild sheep on the mountain. If you're not already a member, learn more today at wildsheepfoundation.org. So what do you think is kind of the way that you would describe based on that, based on kind of your traditional recurve kind of life? What would you start kind of saying as your thoughts on the state of the union of kind of at least American hunting, especially from this conversation of technology and how technology layers on top of hunting, and just the real big increase in technology that we're seeing right now? And so from like the hunting perspective, it brings up some interesting topics around, like the American conservation model seems to be still working quite well with, the National Wild Turkey Federation doing a great job with the turkeys, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation doing a great job with elk. We have, the Wild Sheep Foundation doing a great job. So the animals and the ecosystems and the habitat, all the way from, even if you get into, Ducks Unlimited, seems to be a great model that continues to print out kind of success story after success story. But then when you do kind of get into the human side, and the human side around technology, there are some really interesting things happening where if technology makes hunting easier, it can become a level of easiness that makes it not rewarding enough to be fun, which makes it not rewarding enough to continue to do it. And so we're seeing some examples of that where it is, the extreme long range hunting, I'd say, would be one example of that, where getting, within 40 yards of an animal is a lot different than getting within 740 yards of an animal. And if someone kind of grows up in that lifestyle, then their feeling of hunting is different. They don't have the rush, they don't have the adrenaline. And then that's pushed even further where you have some AI versions of hunting where people are sitting in, digital tree stands rather than going out and actually hunting whitetail. And you have Starlink satellite, being brought into camps. And so people aren't shutting down. They're not engaging with their buddies as much. We're kind of seeing all these different worlds converge. And part of the reason that hunting is so addictive for so many people is that it is hard, and especially bow hunting is hard, and that creates this worthy opponent, and a worthy opponent makes you want to go back after it again and again and again. But with technology kind of coming in from all different directions and your lifetime of experience, how are you feeling about the next 30 years of American hunting?
So it's a big question, obviously multifaceted, but you brought up some great organizations that have done some amazing work, in North America. To your example, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, NWTF, all amazing organizations. To your point, all have done a lot for conservation and for hunting and for knowledge about those animals and preserving, places to do it. One of my biggest fears as I look forward 20, 30 years down the road, when it comes to hunting, is what's happening and the model changing a little bit when it comes to game departments. or parks and wildlife departments, even worse. I don't like it when parks and wildlife come together. I think, parks department's here and, wildlife department should be over here and, a little bit separate, because we're seeing all over the country right now, wildlife management not being based on science anymore, but based on emotion, based on, ballot initiatives. So I think the biggest fear that I have and the biggest concern is that to me is it's the craziest thing I've ever seen, and how that happens. And it scares me that we may break the amazing model that you referenced, which has been working so well, and which is why we have such amazing populations of whitetail and mule deer and elk, and a good balance with predators, you know what I mean? And to mention a few, mountain lions and, coyotes and, wolves to a degree. But as we, start making management decisions based on emotion and not science, not wildlife biologists, not, game wardens, not people in the field, but people that may live in a city that have never seen the animal that they're talking about, that's super concerning for me. So that's the scariest part looking down the road, is the fact that really somehow we need to protect, and we need to put laws or regulations in place that, sound management decisions need to be made by wildlife professionals. You know what I mean? Wildlife biologists, game wardens, to me, should have a lot of input in that. You know what I mean? They're out in the field all the time as well. To have somebody, that lives in the middle of a giant city that has a 1/4 acre making any decision on anything that happens outside the city, to me, is asinine, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I've been at meetings where people stood up and, wanted to talk about wolves, but they've never seen a wild wolf their whole life. They've never seen what a wolf can do. They've never seen a mountain lion that they're trying to, protect, if you will. And they're arguing with wildlife biologists that there's seasons to manage those mountain lions. So I know I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, but that's one of my.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I mean, aren't you? Does that concern you as well? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a big one, and it's interesting. I know that some of what you're referencing most likely is what we have seen a lot in Colorado. And Colorado it brings up, a whole part of this discussion that I didn't reference in the intro to it, of, not only what technology will do to hunting in the next 30 years, but there's also this politic layer. And Colorado has been one of the examples of how crazy this political layer can get, and how quickly it can erode things that we really care about. And I think that for me, that is one of the most frightening things. It is being from Montana and watching Colorado and watching some of the Colorado politics when it comes to hunting and even non-hunting issues. What it has shown me is these things that we deeply care about, we can lose overnight. I mean, we can lose them so fast. And Colorado has kind of demonstrated some of that. And I know some of that was, the mountain lion case and the mountain lion issue and how that came about. But what it did do for sure is it showed that detachment of science from management can be real disastrous, and we got to keep our eye out on that one for sure. I've noticed that if the gear you're using isn't reliable, it's much easier to back off early and quit. GoRuck's products hold up, and at Mountain Tough, rucking has become an essential aspect of our programming. Rucking combines cardio and resistance training, burning up to 3 times more calories than regular walking while strengthening your joints with very little impact. It also boosts VO2 max, bone density, and it makes it an efficient, science-backed way to improve overall fitness. The Rucker 4.0 is purpose-built for rucking, featuring elevated plate pockets to keep weight high and stable reinforced construction. GoRuck is offering 20% off their products for Mountain Tough Podcast listeners. All you need to do is use code Mountain Tough Community. That's MTNTOUGH Community when checking out at goruck.com. All right, back to work.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's Colorado, but it's Oregon, it's Washington, it's, into California, it's everywhere. I mean, I was, saddened by going through Big Sky, Montana, and seeing all kinds of signs, you know what I mean? Stop grizzly, don't ever delist the grizzly, and, stop trapping. I'm like, the West was founded but Western expansion was fueled by the fur harvest. You know what I mean? Trapping, is a great way to manage predators, and you know what I mean, that often cause damage. So, it's every state, I think, deals with it to a degree. But like you said, we're in danger of losing that. But on the technology, I almost think the same to a degree. I think technology can, I think it can threaten the hunting that we have as well. You know what I mean? Like, muzzleloader season, in some states was meant to be a primitive season, and then, of course there were muzzleloaders with, inline, and you know what I mean? Then you weren't loading it from the muzzle, which is, muzzleloader, and then they had this, sabots, and they had scopes, and they had CDSs, or, you know what I mean? All this stuff put on a muzzleloader.
Yeah.
And departments had to look at that and go, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Now we've got this issue to deal with, and where do we draw the line? So yeah, personally, technology can certainly take away a lot of the challenge, and it can also dumb it down a little bit, if you will. You know what I mean? I liked it when there wasn't all the mapping programs that, you know what I mean? There's people that, I've found in the middle of nowhere that had no business being in the middle of nowhere. They didn't have a gear for it. They didn't know quite what they were doing. And, they didn't spend the time scouting to find the water hole. They looked it up on a satellite image. So, there's things like that I go, man, I guess it has its place in some places, but, where you draw that line. And, I think that's where people have to individually make that decision. Do I want to be a guy that's out there and my goal is only to get, 700 yards or 500 yards, whatever that, random, limit is you put on it to, from an elk? Or do I want to be the guy that, even though I have a rifle, wants to try and get 100 yards? Or, do I want to go with the bow and make it more of a challenge? And, so I think everybody's got to look at that. And, it's not a one size fits all. You know what I mean? Everybody has different goals. Like, if my goal is teaching, a kid to fish, I'm not going to start them out with a fly rod. I'm going to start them out with a bobber and a worm and let them have some fun and hopefully catch a fish. If my goal is, is to get dinner that night, I'm sure as heck I'm not good enough. I'm not going to grab my fly rod. I'm going to grab a lure to, a top water plug or whatever they're hitting on. And I'm going to try and, catch some fish to eat dinner. So, again, it's so much of that is a personal, personal restrictions or personal things. You've got, guys that want to take the short way out, sometimes, no matter what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a hard topic. It's interesting. I have an 11-year-old daughter and a 13-year-old daughter, and I try to think about it from the perspective of how good of a job are we doing leaving it in their hands, and so that they can enjoy everything I've got to enjoy when it comes from an outdoor perspective. And then what's it going to look like when their kids step into like their first elk camp as well. And it's an interesting one because, like in the West, trailheads around here are more crowded than they ever have been in my 25 years of hunting around here. And Mountain Tough, our business is a part of promoting that and promoting guys to get out and live in those adventures and to get in the mountains and do something risky and do something scary and do something in the unknown, because we know that backcountry hunting is going to change that guy's life. And now you have crowded trailheads, so the hunting's not the same as it used to be, and there's no secret spots anymore, and you're running into guys in spots that you thought were secret, and so it it causes some friction and it causes some tension because you are really glad they're out there. You're really glad they're not sitting at home watching TV. But the hunting has changed because of that. And so, we kind of have that going on in the West, and it's harder to get a tag at, all the states where you used to be able to pull a non-resident tag, Montana, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah. It's all different. It's all more complicated. It's all much more unlikely that you're going to be as successful as you were even 5-10 years ago. And then you have the rest of the country, and the rest of the country we're seeing less hunters than ever before. So like the Midwest, we have a decline in that kid going out and hunting behind his farm in Iowa and Kansas and Nebraska. And those properties are being hunted, but it's all being leased up by big money. And even that big money private land is spreading into the West. And so for me to sit back and think, what is this going to look like, in 2076, it's hard to wrap your mind around.
No, you're right. And you brought us some great points. It's and you've got to work harder, but sometimes that's a little bit of the challenge too. Like, last spring, I took my horse and drove up to Montana by myself, just me and my horse, and went up on public land. And I decided to take my lever action, I took a 44 instead of a long range rifle, because I thought, man, kind of felt right with the horse and being out there in the wilderness. And it was really cool. I ended up getting a beautiful bear, but it would have been an awesome hunt if I didn't. But it was a fun one for me, because it was like, yeah, my gosh, I'm gonna grab my horse and I'm gonna drive up to Montana, and I'm gonna go out and see if I can find a black bear, and I did, and it was awesome. So there's still, and where I was at, you know what I mean? I like to think I went in there a little further and didn't run into a ton of people. And, there's still a lot of trailheads are full 100%, you know what I mean? But, there's still a lot of places that you can go, and still, here in Colorado, New Mexico, Montana, there's still a lot of places, especially for the guy that wants to, whether it's do a little research or just go a little further, you know what I mean? Don't just take off, go further back in there than a lot of people want to go, and, sleep on the ground or, whatever. There's still some great hunting opportunities, and we still have better opportunities than anywhere in the world. You know what I mean? The diversity and the number of states that we can still travel. So, although don't get me wrong, I love taking advantage of, private land, I've got some good friends that are guides, and that's great. And I still enjoy a lot of, guided hunts with friends, or, hunting private ranches. But at the same time, I still enjoy, going out and, hunting public land and, testing my mettle, or, what I mean? Getting in there and getting after it and trying to get it done on public land as well. So I really enjoy that. Last year we were up hunting some areas that were public, and it's just fun. You know what I mean? I enjoy it. We're trying to hopefully draw Kansas this year. I'll be deer hunting public land over there. And, so that's, I get your point. And yeah, it's great. You see more and more people out there, and with Mountain Tough and you guys is, what you're pushing is getting out there. And it's a plus and a minus. Like you said, you push people out there, then you're like, oh man, there's 10 trucks in my spot. But, but at the same time, it's, that's the fun of it, right? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, there's guys here, maybe I can go to spot number 2, or, you don't have to. I hear a lot of people like, oh, there's no opportunities anymore. And I'm like, no, that's not true. You know what I mean? I can go on a public land and, usually get it done. And, you can too. It's just not as easy. And, and some of the private ranches I hunt, they're as hard as public land, just because they may get hunted a lot, you know what I mean? Or the, smaller piece, there's people all around it hunting. And I'm like, man, arguably that's, I've hunted some public land that I got into that was way better than some of the private places that were, that were pressured hard. So,
it's a good point. We are extremely blessed. And I mean, the American model, even though it's got room for improvement, there is nowhere else in the world that really compares. I mean, we are so blessed with the diversity and the abundance of opportunities out there. It's pretty pretty wild. 10 years ago, we kicked off the Backcountry Preseason Prep program. It was a straightforward 80-day program built from thousands of hours testing with dedicated backcountry hunters. Now, with a full decade of real results, we've completely rebuilt it into Preseason Prep 3.0. We've added more aggressive metabolic conditioning, smarter load progression, tougher mental finishers, and even better programming to help hunters build that unbreakable grit for high country, heavy packs, and long days in rough terrain. It is still the same mission, getting you stronger and mentally tougher for the backcountry. It's just taken to the next level after 10 years of honest feedback from hunters in the field. Preseason Prep 3.0 launches May 4th. If you are serious about this fall, it is worth checking out. Mountain Tough Podcast listeners always get 6 weeks for free on the Mountain Tough app. All you need to do to take advantage of that is use the code MOUNTAINPOD at checkout. That's MTNPOD on your monthly membership.
It really is. I mean, so to put a thumbs up on it, or to mean a positive take on it, there's a lot of for people that are willing to work a little bit, or put in for different places, or experience different things. There's still some great hunting opportunities. And like you, I'd love to see people getting out there. I want to see more people doing it. But yeah, every once in a while, it's like, oh, dang it, there's a guy right there. I'd have to go a little further.
Yeah, but we need those guys. I mean, the guys out there that we're running into is the community that we need that's going to protect this thing. So that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and all very like-minded. I mean, it seems like if there was and granted I'm biased, but if there was just a good group of people, man, people that enjoy the outdoors and appreciate the sunrises and the sunsets and the natural beauty, and want to be not in the concrete jungle and breathe some clean air, and whether that's hiking or kayaking or fishing or biking, whatever that is, boy, I can get along better with those men and women than I can people that, it seems like can't even relate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can find them in a room. Like if you are at a big convention that's not hunting related, within 5 minutes you can be chatting with some backcountry hunters in the corner, and you're like, how did I even find these guys? Like the like-minded nature of it. It's crazy.
Yep.
So Fred, as we wrap things up here, final question is, what comes to mind for you in the trip or the adventure that you felt like you were closest to dying on? What's the trip that you shouldn't have came home from, that you feel like had the most chance of something that was very close to going really wrong not happening?
Well, one was from a political situation, and some have been from animals. But I was actually in Zimbabwe when Mugabe, basically said all whites were enemies of the state, which was racial thing, which was horrible situation to get caught up with. And the ZANU PF were killing people on places close to where we were at. So that was that was a pretty scary situation. I got over there and got in the middle of a political and a lot of civil unrest, if you will, where a lot of people were killed and a lot of people were hurt and lives were changed. So politically, that was a really rough one. But as far as animals, boy, there's been a few where I just thought, whether, this grizzly bear is going to get me, or, man, this brown bear's a couple feet away. This is going to be, I had a guy, turn a charge that saved me. It wasn't anything I did myself. I wish, I would have been the one that was, as prepared as he was, but I just had my recurve. I didn't even have a weapon other than that. And it was taken down in the middle of the raft. Carrying a 500 Smith & Wesson and managed to pull it in an amazing amount of time. Like, just watching it was like a quick draw, watching how quickly he pulled and shot in front of that brown bear and turned the charge. That was one where, boy, it was very fast, but I didn't think we were going to get out of it. Without being mauled, that was one where I thought, this is going to hurt a little bit. So, crazy ones.
I've watched that video a dozen times. That one I believe you're referring to in the raft where there's the cubs, and the speed that mama bear comes at you guys is insane. Like insane how fast she was coming.
You had no time to prepare. I mean, zero. I mean, it would have been, had he not, and he was the only one armed, but my cameraman was amazing. He even caught it. He said it happened so fast. He had the camera up, just happened to catch it, type thing. He said had he known exactly what was going on, he would have thrown the camera, gone underneath the boat. But but it was like you said, it was so incredibly fast. So yeah, but when you make it through those situations, it's like, wow, that was amazing. And I've been able to educate some people and tell them, there's certain situations too that you just can't prepare for that. There's you couldn't have been really that much more ready. We weren't provoking the bear in any way other than just floating down the river. So,
man,
but
that one is very miraculous. Like watching that video, the fact the guide lifted his gun fast enough on that bear doesn't make sense. And he missed, so he shot in the water. The bear could have easily just kept coming and went right through that raft.
Oh yeah, I mean it was feet away. It was impressive that he turned it. He actually, his story was that he shot in front of it on purpose to try and turn it. Now he could have been scared, just missed it, came up with a story quick, which would be impressive, which would have been impressive as well. But I know the guy pretty well. I think it was legit. But and I've said to people, it's like with a dog and a skunk. One dog gets sprayed by a skunk. He never gets close to the skunk. He leaves the skunk alone. Another dog gets sprayed by a skunk. He doesn't care. He kills the skunk, rips it apart. You know what I mean? So, same thing with porcupines. Some dogs get one quill, they're done. Some dogs get one quill and they're like, I'm gonna take this porcupine. So it was just very fortunate that she did turn. But it was interesting because if you watch the video slow-mo, she turned almost completely broadside to look at us. Even after she diverted the charge, at one point in the video, she turned almost completely broadside to look and make sure we weren't getting in closer to her cubs.
Man,
she would have come again. So, but yeah, those are the, crazy, circumstances. Leopard that charged me. There's some crazy circumstances where, firearms or guys that knew exactly what they were doing, have prevented things from getting way, way worse.
Yeah.
But that's part of the adventure. I'd never not go again because I got charged by a brown bear. I'd never not go again, you know what I mean? Because I got charged, or, you know what I mean? Or somebody else got hurt in the party or things like that. You take a risk when you drive your vehicle to the grocery store too, but it doesn't really stop you from going and getting milk,
Yeah. I love it. Well, Fred, thank you. I appreciate you jumping on and diving into these topics. It's been an honor to chat with you today, and it's been a privilege to kind of see you be a leader and an authority in the hunting industry, and just for standing firm and holding that ground all these years. And now with your sons with you and your dad still guiding, it's amazing to see what you guys have done, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. And you guys continue doing what you're doing. I mean, it's an awesome message you're pushing, and I hope you continue to impact a lot of people's lives.
Thank you.